Yes. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this session of the newly rebranded Astromed Yoga podcast, Metaphysical Matters. So my name is Adam Sanchez. I'm your host, and I will be joined here today by the incredible Andrew Aponick. Andrew, thanks for being here with us today. Why don't you introduce yourself and just share, what you feel like you want to share here in this space?
What's going on, man? Just Andrew, just so the audience knows, this is a 2.5 year planned podcast and unplanned podcast at the same time. Because the divine flow, just that's the way it was. Adam and I connected 3 years ago, and we meant to do this about 2.5 years ago. So it's happening, and I'm happy to be here. I just wanted to express my gratitude for the two of us showing up, finally making this work. But I guess since your audience likely doesn't know me, I am a trauma recovery coach, a physiologist. I'm trained in internal family systems therapy, aka parts work. I do some inner child work, somatic therapy with my clients. I'm a recovering addict, so well versed, like the 12 steps. I studied addiction recovery in graduate school while high on drugs. And yeah, it took me many years to get here, but I'm happy to be here sober, healing, not healed, definitely, but always a work in progress. And yeah, man, just glad we finally connected on this, as a podcast after 2.5 years. So yeah, man, appreciate you having me on.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's my pleasure. And that's an amazing repertoire of skill sets that you have there. I definitely wanted to ask you some more about it. But regarding, our long held plans finally coming to fruition, it's like, yeah, sometimes that divine timing just has its own plans. I mean, it's not like for lack of trying, right? We had three
No,
separate schedules and, a lot of Mercury retrograde was going on at the times I
I
remember
remember.
because I track those things. And we do ironically have a Mercury retrograde today as we're filming, but that's actually an appropriate use of Mercury retrograde to go back to something that was unfinished and
Yeah.
finish it. So totally in alignment. Happy to be here. You said something about family constellations, or what was the term that you
No,
used?
in family constellation is a modality, but internal family systems therapy. And
This one. Okay, sorry, I confused the two. Could you say
yeah,
a
no,
little bit more about what that is?
yeah, sure. Basically, put it in a funny way, we're all schizophrenic. All right.
Oh, okay.
We all, no, to be on a more serious note, though, we all have an inner dialogue, an inner monologue, an inner voice. Some might think we have voices, but really they're just parts. And parts are basically aspects of our psyche that came to be as a result of adverse childhood experiences, trauma, emotional wounds. And to make a long story short, when we experience trauma, we exile the inner child. So it's kind of like a very structured inner child kind of work. We exile that inner child, and in order to keep that inner child in exile, parts start to pop up. Some of them are proactive, some of them are reactive, and then these parts
Mhm.
start to guide our life in order to keep this exile exiled. Because if the exile is triggered, is activated, and it surfaces, so to speak, then our entire system gets overwhelmed. And so, when we're children, we don't have the tools to heal yet. We don't have, unfortunately, a lot of our times our caretakers are the ones who are causing us trauma. So when they cause us trauma or trigger us, they're not in a position to then sit with us and hold space, and help us to resolve the emotions and discharge the traumatic energy. So as a result, we create a trauma response, a survival mechanism, in this case, a part, and so some parts are managerial, and they keep us going on a day-to-day basis, always keeping us distracted from looking inward. And then, so those are called managers. And then we have more reactive parts called firefighters. And those appear when we're triggered. So,
Mm.
when something happens, we reach for a bottle of alcohol. A really common one is we grab our cell phone and we doom scroll. That's a really, really big one. Other ones are, like sex addiction, drug addiction, porn addiction, relationship addiction, anything that's like really hyper reactive that can help us really distract from what happened and give us a big dopamine boost.
Mm.
So IFS is basically a model of how that all operates, and a way, of course, of getting us, to basically befriend these parts, like these inner children, I call them, the protectors, they're really called, to get them to quiet down. And eventually, as they quiet down, and they become, more mature, so to speak.
Mm.
Then my analogy is like, imagine you're in like a kindergarten classroom or nursery school. All the kids are going crazy. You slowly get them to quiet down, and then suddenly, because now we're quiet, you see in the corner of the room little Susie or little Joey crying in the corner, and that's the exile. That's the inner child that's been exiled. That we weren't able to see because of all the distractions and all the kids, aka the parts. So IFS is basically a way of navigating all of that, so that we can eventually tend to the inner child, the exile, that really is the one who needs our attention the most. But we can't get there yet until we quiet down the classroom, until all those children are felt seen and witnessed, and loved, and heard. So IFS is a modality of getting there, essentially.
Hmm. That's fascinating. I love that framework and the metaphor within it, and how perfectly timed, because the current Mercury retrograde we have right now is in Leo. And if you look
Yeah,
into astrology at all, you'll understand Leo is the sign of children and the inner child. And so there's that, divine creative spark that's within all children, within all humans. But as we grow and often mature, it's like that shine gets a little bit dull and, more into matter and more just like, okay, I have to get the day done, as opposed to
yeah,
like
yeah,
creativity and joy and, playfulness and that inner divine spark.
yeah, yeah. We tend to, what's the word, repress or suppress a lot of that, divine child in us, to basically, keep us safe. And that, again, that's like one of our parts. And then, it's an aspect of shadow work. Obviously, what shadow work is. I'm sure your listeners and followers and viewers know what it is. But I mean, IFS is really, it's basically like a form of shadow work.
Hmm.
All these parts are on.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, just that's why I like the framework, because it also kind of makes it a little bit lighter. It's like it's understanding there's this gentle inner child. There's this, subtle dialogue that has to happen between the parts of yourself. It's not necessarily, I mean, nothing wrong with necessarily 12 steps. I hear people get really great results, with some of those things, but like just working with people to modify behavior, right? You were talking about addiction and, the way to chase dopamine as a way to basically handle or deal with the stresses in our life, right? And most everybody's doing it with something, whether they're aware of it or not in most cases. But it doesn't actually solve the problem, right? Because you're just replacing one thing with the other. So when you do any new addiction, replacement, like you can't just stop the thing. You have to actually supplant a new behavior or new habit that's going to be constructive instead of the destructive one, right? So what it sounds like you're doing in that work, and also you do this with shadow work, but again, even that name could be maybe off-putting for some people,
Oh yeah,
right? Like,
yeah,
oh no, I don't want to do that. So, the lightheartedness is a really great way to heal, that playful joy. It's important.
yeah, yeah, definitely, yeah, yeah. And I was going to say is, there's, it's also like a way to figure out what's repressed, without, like you said, having to like use the word shadow work. I mean, like, there's basically like four reasons why we push stuff into the unconscious shadow, and that's to maintain our worldview, to maintain our identity, to basically run from our unmet needs that we get, and of course,
Mhm.
just straight up trauma. Just
Mhm.
the overwhelming of the system. And so, yeah, yeah, it's like you said, it kind of like puts it into a framework where it's not as scary. And like a real an important mantra in parts work is, there are no bad parts.
Mhm.
And so all of these parts that came up, yeah, sometimes they become self-sabotaging, but ultimately they served a purpose. They kept us, like, I actually was talking to an old friend of mine actually earlier today, and we kind of both realized that, I was like, I became a pothead at like 15, right? And him and I became best friends at 15. He had a lot of access to weed. he drove a car, 15, 16, like we're still like freshmen, sophomores in high school. So he got a
Yeah.
car early, he had access to weed. Well, what happened around 14, 15 years old? I had a nervous breakdown.
Hmm.
I literally had an ulcer, a bleeding ulcer, and I locked myself in the bathroom for about 24 hours. And yeah. And then after that, I had like what we would call Epstein Barr, which was really, like falling asleep in class, whatever they want to pathologize it, it was a trauma response. I was dissociating, from all the adverse stuff going on at home and also from the pressures that I had from my parents. And so it's like, it's funny, like coincidentally, me and my friend become best friends, and suddenly he's got marijuana, and for what it's worth, I became a pothead and eventually drug addict later in life. But I don't think I would have been able to survive those 2 years, without having the weed. For what it's worth, even if sometimes, I did stupid things when I'm high, or I didn't do things at all because I was too stoned. You know, that was the tool that was available to me at 15 years old. So there was a pothead part of me, that rose up, that was generated by my psyche, and it filled that role that I needed. I needed something, to help get me through, to keep my nervous system calm, because unfortunately, my nervous system was dysregulated by all the stuff going on at home. My parents had their own, nervous system dysregulation and their own shadows and stuff. They just, were not in a position to help me through it. And mind you, I was avoidant and a reckless, and we can go into all the depth psychology of that, the attachment styles. Um, so I wasn't ready to be vulnerable anyway. So perfect. Marijuana part sprang up. I got high, and it got me through that part of my life. You know. So
Well, there's so much richness in what you share, and actually, I remembered one of the things that we wanted to talk about 2.5 years ago that
yeah,
came up now in terms of support systems and this new model of addiction, based on the old sort of like moralistic one. But there's a few things in there that you want to set. So I want to talk about parts work and Jung, and as it relates to like archetypes, right? But back to the rat park. Do you remember the rat park conversation? Maybe the one
yeah.
two
Oh,
couple of
well,
years
yeah,
ago.
yeah, yeah. When the rats got all their needs met, right? Is that what you're talking about? That they didn't
Hmm.
have the constant dopamine, cycle. Yeah,
Yes, that's exactly the one. So the actual study was they gave rats, as opposed to the old model, the moralistic one of addiction. Okay, rats in a cage, give them cocaine, and they kill themselves from overdosing on cocaine because that's all they got
yeah,
is cocaine in a cage. Versus Rat Park, they also have cocaine, but it's not a cage; it's a paradise, and they have everything a rat could possibly want: food, sex, play, toys, everything. And they almost never touch the cocaine,
yeah,
right? So this new model of understanding that the environment is actually the deciding factor of whether or not people feel compelled to, rely on addictions, because it comes down to support systems.
yeah,
People need support systems, and if they're not actually getting it from a social structure like we're actually meant to as social creatures, humans, then we're going to rely on other things. And so it's not enough to just say, oh, it's bad and wrong to do this thing. It's like, well, why are we doing that? What else is missing? And how can we actually fulfill that missing part?
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Like the rat that was in the original experiments, with the cocaine, they were like literally in a little cage, with the bare minimum, without any connection to other rats, or if there was, they didn't have anything else they needed, and and yeah, it became like, well, if you have all your needs met, environmentally, especially support, and also they had other rats that they were mating with and connecting with. They may not be romantic because they're rats, but it's similar to us, where if we have like healthy, stable connections, that we're not going to look to any drugs. And it's actually, as I've actually gotten sober over the years, although I'm not going to like test this with my drug of choice, which was opiates, or any hard stuff. I quit. I tested it recently. I quit cigarettes after 33 years,
Oh,
and I
wow.
quit for 15 months, and I quit caffeine, and recently, that's a tough one, man, because that's everywhere.
Yeah, it's super. Everyone's
It's
into it and they don't
everywhere.
even realize.
And hold on a second.
Don't get me wrong, I like caffeine too. I
No,
can't
well,
do it every day. My body
that's
will
that's what I'm
will
going to get
revolt.
into. So it was like it was like now after 2.5 years almost of sobriety and some really, really deep shadow work, it was like, okay, can I just smoke a cigarette, like bum a cigarette from a friend and then not have one for weeks?
Hmm.
Matter of fact, I bought like a bag of real tobacco, not like, I used to smoke Newports, which are probably the worst. Menthols, and then obviously all the chemicals in it. And I bought a bag and rolled up organic tobacco when I was in the desert. I was meditating and I would have it once or twice a day, not chain smoking. And then I was able to come home and just put it down and not even think about it. And then on the 4th of July, I bummed a cigarette or two from a friend, didn't have any for weeks, didn't think about it.
Mm.
Then I went out again and went into the woods, bought a little more tobacco, rolled it up, so actually did it ceremonial also. Like I took some of the tobacco and like I dropped it on the forest floor and did like a ritual with it. So that was like my offering to nature was this tobacco. And then came home, no problems putting it down. And so, yeah, it was like, so what's the difference? My environment, the support that I have, all of the needs that are now being met, and of course, I had to do a lot of inner work to get there,
Yep.
obviously. So it's not just the environment because you could put someone, who's really dysregulated into the most comforting, supportive environment. But if they're not ready to do the inner work, it's not going to matter. So it is definitely a combination of both. But doing the
Mm.
inner work brings you to those supportive environments. And then once you're in those environments, you cannot chain smoke anymore. You're not going to have coffee every day. It could be an actual like little treat. Hey, I haven't had coffee in a couple of weeks. Why not have a cup of coffee with a friend? Something like that. Whereas like when I started my addiction recovery, I had to put everything down. I just had to put it all down because all of it was a part, that I was using no matter what. And I had so many addictions: cigarettes, porn, weed, pharmaceuticals, social media. I mean, like literally everything. And like I did an inventory on all my addictions, and I was like, holy shit, I have like 10 to 12 addictions. Some obviously worse than others, but some of them are so benign that we don't think about
Hmm.
it, and that's where I think a lot of us what a lot of us overlook also. It's not just the hard drugs. It's a lot of like the little small ones, like the dopamine hits we get from social media, you know? So
Yeah, I mean, I'll share you from my own journey because it's
yeah,
funny.
please.
As a teenager growing up in New York City, I was afforded lots of opportunities for things I probably shouldn't have. Right? We were similar in that.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
did smoke a Newport or two in my day, though they weren't my favorite. But they were very popular in New York at the time for sure. Um, at the time, and I wasn't actually, because a lot of people, maybe in similar circles, like a lot of my friends were going out every weekend doing drugs every weekend, and I wouldn't judge. I would partake maybe, once a month, once every few months. I didn't relate to it in the same way. So I was, I guess, deluded enough to believe myself when I said, oh, I don't have an addictive personality.
Yeah.
I would smoke cigarettes, but like no more than maybe one or two a day, right? It was like I was different. But I had no idea about my sugar addiction.
Mm.
No clue. It took me like 10 more years to even
Yeah,
start
yeah.
to clock, like, oh, wait a second, that's a lot of sugar. Maybe that means something. Maybe I should pay attention to that. And it took me many more years to actually start to understand. People do, I wonder, it took me, I was 25 when I
Mhm.
first asked the question. We had the internet for many years. I went online, why is sugar bad for you? And I actually started looking into it. And it was right there, very available information. But who asked? Almost no one, because almost everyone is addicted to sugar.
Yeah,
Almost
yeah,
everyone.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and that talk about ubiquitous that people think is innocuous, it's actually super dangerous. It's probably the most dangerous overlooked addiction that we have. And the complicated part of it is that you actually kind of need sugars to survive where you don't need most of those other things to survive. Like, okay, you can go to ketosis, and that's, how I was able to reverse a lot of my health stuff because I wasn't actually fully relying on sugar, but you can't live in ketosis forever. You do eventually need like some sugars in your diet here or there. And there's this primal need that's also compounded onto an addiction. So
Mhm.
it's like very tied up. It's like, how do you move away from that? You can't just, stop eating forever, right? Like you have to like, figure it out. So That one was the one, and I even still, like I'm pretty good with it these days because it's been many years. It was 12 years ago basically that I finally got that monkey off my back,
Okay.
and I had to go like cold turkey. I was eating keto, and I wasn't even eating any protein or carbohydrates. I was just eating vegetables for like a whole month.
Well, I'm sure your gut like that.
My body was definitely happy at the end of it. The
Yeah,
process
yeah.
itself was like an
Oh,
exorcism.
of
It was
course. Yeah,
like, walking through the valley of the shadow of death sort of
yeah,
vibe
yeah.
a little bit.
Dopamine rush, yeah. Yeah, sugar is hard because it's we have to eat. And that's why I have a lot of respect for people, especially who battled food addictions and body image addiction, body
Mm.
image issues, which lead to food,
Yeah, they're very coupled
and eating
often.
disorders like that. And I've had body image issues. Um, so women need to be skinny and men have to be big. So I
Hmm.
found that like I started working out at 10 years old,
Wow.
and I realized that that was my first addiction. Really, I smoked a cigarette at 10, and I had my first drink at 10. But the thing that sustained was like I would work. My dad bought a weights at home, and once a month I started working out, and then it was like twice a month. And by 12 years old, it was once a week, and like lots of the culture too. I was like idolized like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and
Hmm.
Rocky and Sylvester Stallone. But yeah, so it led to my own kind of like body dysmorphia later in life. And then thankfully it didn't lead to like growing up, in New York like you and Long Island especially. Thankfully it did not lead to steroids because I
Mm.
was like surrounded by all the Jersey Shore people.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. And the Long Island Bridge and Tunnel, we called them, and yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
the Bridge and Tunnel people. Yeah, I was one of those people who came to your city, and
I was normally fine, except that they would often start a lot of fights. But
oh
again,
my God,
with
they
the
were the worst.
testosterone.
I had the hair, the freaking
I do know, yeah.
the spikes and like the tight shirts, all that. But anyways, I digress. Yeah, like that whole culture is very body image conscious. Very,
Hmm.
very, very, very dysmorphic. Sadly, and I was definitely in that for a couple of years, and then that led to like fitness modeling. And so it was terrible. What would happen is it would reinforce the fitness modeling. My body had dysmorphia, and then I was a personal trainer. So now like my body is like my billboard. So
Hmm.
now I like it just kept reinforcing it and reinforcing it and reinforcing it. And it's amazing the wisdom of the body and your spirit and your soul journey. Is I had to get like Lyme disease years later. I got bit by ticks, and I had to get
Mm.
severe tendonitis in both arms
Wow.
before I had to stop working out. And so I worked out from age 10 to age 40, 43, 42, almost every day, especially for the last 25 years. And then suddenly I had to stop cold turkey, you know? And so just like you with the sugar, I had to pretty much go cold turkey. And it made me totally re-examine, my relationship with exercise and body movement, and all that. And of course my diet too. Um, but yeah, like now I look at exercise, for functionality, and as a way to work with the energy of my body and not just a way to get validation, to get big muscles. And then of course we can go into like, anima projection and animus, and all that stuff as far as like our inner masculine and feminine, aspects and the lack of integration of my anima, my feminine, I think a lot of it was overcompensated by the exercise,
Hmm.
and feeling like I have to be manly, that kind of stuff.
I'm super fascinated by this topic. I love that we kind of came here because it makes me think of a lot of things. And I mean, being in the fitness world, right? So a lot of what you said really speaks to me. The body dysmorphia, my body is a billboard. It's like all these things, and it's fine because I guess on one level it kind of makes sense, but on other levels it also is very limiting in the sense that like people don't necessarily understand the whole picture based on just like one little piece, right? So. That being said, I'm sure you probably heard this. I've said it before in the
Yeah,
past, like in terms of people being addicted to yoga or addicted to exercise, that like, well, if you're gonna have an addiction, it's probably like the best addiction you can have.
yeah,
But I think what you're illuminating here in the conversation is that that might also have some space to be true, but there's also like this hidden cost that might not be as obvious, on the surface. And maybe you could speak to that a little bit more, especially as it relates to that connection you were making to like your inner feminine and how that's
Yeah.
in it.
Well, yeah. So if like it's like if I'm out of touch, my inner feminine, if it's not integrated, then I have issues, with the feminine, and I'm afraid of it, and issues with my own masculinity. And I think like uh, most men, whether it's they're hyper masculized, and like the manosphere they call it, like the androtatosphere, you know, and that's like, and we can go into like how it plays out in the collective consciousness. That's usually like the conservative side, the polarity coaches and all them, and then you have
Right.
the
Yeah.
left side, which is the effeminate more men, the liberal men, the feminist men, and they're kind of like they idealize the hyper masculine women, and you can get into that, but but yeah, like a lot of it with the culture too. Like I said, like seeing all these masculine men, but it's like, meanwhile, deep down inside, you hear people making jokes, like, oh well, they're so big and they get big cars and because they have a small penis or something like that. I mean, it's symbolically they're insecure about their own masculinity, and really what it comes down to is they're not in touch with their own femininity,
Mm.
with their own anima, and then that can go into stuff like, for instance, your anima projection, and so like what your sense of a woman is has to do with your relationship to your mother.
Hmm.
And so I had a lot of issues with that. um I actually had like uh, a moderate version of what's called the devouring mother. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
Oh yeah, I'm very familiar with the
Okay, yeah.
terms. Yeah.
I have a great quote I want to read from Jordan Peterson. Don't care if you
Hmm.
like him or not. Truth is truth, you know.
Mm.
But it goes, the devouring mother archetype is the one that can be described as a woman who selfishly loves her children, protecting them from the real world to such an extent that they become permanent infants, incompetent wards of the mother for life. She is only loving when her children do what she wants, and she's hateful, cruel, and even homicidal when they don't. She is the various so-called civil rights movements that seek to suppress free speech in the name of political correctness. And
Mm.
she is the unacknowledged social policy that implores parents to lie to their children in an effort to keep them safe, all while robbing them of the very life experience they need to face the world with wisdom. Modern devouring mothers, such as university professors and administrators acting in loco parentis, would soon provide safe spaces, trigger warnings, speech codes, banishment of controversial speakers, and free coloring books, milk, and cookies for young adults who had been offended or might feel unsafe with opposing points of view or microaggressions on campus. And lastly, these same young adults would also be encouraged to skip classes and engage in emotional direct action demonstrations for the rights of the oppressed. Of course, if they challenged the wisdom or motives involved, they were punished with lesser grades, possibly even banishment, forfeiting tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars paid toward a degree that was promised to provide them with the key to wealth for life. So I know that's a mouthful.
It's a lot in there for sure.
Yeah, yeah. But the way I can relate to that is, like I said, my mother never went to the feminist ends of stuff, but definitely like she wanted to keep me safe. And then what I would do is rebel. So it wasn't good, in a sense, because rebellion and authority, it's good at points in our lives, but like if you stay in rebellion to authority, then that in itself becomes self-sabotaging. Then you don't ask for help, so because to me, help was dangerous. My mom over nurturing me was devouring me, and so it was unsafe to ask for help. So I became avoidant and like hyper independent. You know,
Yes, I mean, I think I think there might even be a little bit of being hard on yourself in that languaging because was it really help? It was by the offer perceived as help,
yeah,
but by the recipient not actually experienced as help, right? So it's not really help if someone's not providing you help. That doesn't mean that they weren't trying to help, but it still means the impact is not the same, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
I think, in that sense, it's normal and natural that you would shut down and say no. to that form of help. I've experienced it many times myself where it's like, no, actually, what you're doing is not helping. So it'd be better if I
Yeah.
struggled alone, honestly, because then I won't have to pick up your mess and my own. I'll just have to deal with my own.
Yeah. Exactly.
So, there's complexities to the psychology involved, and I love this conversation because I know, we had one main agenda for today in the podcast, which was, the archetypes of the divine masculine, divine feminine, and we're kind of starting to lay some of the groundwork already. What I'm also seeing a lot in the conversation is the astrological archetypes, right? Which Jung was also very deep into astrology. I mean, I absolutely love his work. I'm quoting him in my book in a few different ways. And it just feels like, yeah, that shadow cancer energy, basically, of and you see it kind of popularized these days, I think, because society has been so indoctrinated to be so fearful with the helicopter parenting, right? I mean, and I'm not saying that the latchkey kids of our generation were better. I honestly think that we were very abandoned as a generation and left too much to our own devices. But now it's gone polar opposite, where it's like they don't have any freedom and they're constantly being watched, even to the point of, electronic leashes on their devices, et cetera, right? It's like that fear of the parent, which is like, I must control my child in order for them to be safe. But this is a twisted psychology that's not healthy at all, because the parent is not relating to the child as a person. They're relating to them as an object. It's all ego fear. It's like, what's going to mean about me if they die? Or what's going to happen to me, my, I. It's not actually present with the child because, again, the trauma of their
Yeah.
own childhood, their own parental relationships, their own needs not getting met. They don't have those tools to pass them on, but the cycle has to break at some point, right?
Yeah. Yeah. My mom was super codependent, and and when my father basically, I mean, this was, inevitably it was going to come out at some point in her life, and I think it mostly came out when my father, he was an addict for the first 8 years of my life,
Mm.
and so basically it's like she started to slowly replace my father with me, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and then as I got older and I started to like achieve things and got good grades and was good at music and athletics, then I became, like she put me on a pedestal, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like,
The golden child.
yep, like idealized me. Um, if I'm going to be completely honest, no one wants to say the N word, but gave me like enabled some narcissistic tendencies.
Mm.
Like, no,
Mm-hmm.
not that N word, some narcissistic
Well,
tendencies.
it's actually much less narcissistic of you to admit that than
Yeah.
not. So you're already, like, as far as I'm concerned,
Oh yeah,
better than most.
I was a reckless little bastard. Like I didn't want her help, but I knew the entitlement she gave me. Knew that if my reckless ass got in trouble, that I could get bailed out. And I literally once got bailed out. My dad put up $10,000 when I was an addict. Yeah,
Wow.
and so it created this really vicious cycle. And ultimately, it was like in codependence literature, it's actually known as other esteem. So
Mm.
basically, self-esteem is, of course, as you know, when you get your own self-worth from your inward connection to the divine, and your own higher self. Um, but when you're, of course, when that's absent, or fragmented in your life, then you have to seek it outside of you, and so you get your esteem from others, whatever it is. Sometimes it's your job, sometimes it's your status, sometimes it's your children. And
Mm-hmm.
so my mother got her self-esteem from me, because I was like this like little prodigy child. And then so she would do everything she could to keep me safe, like I was saying in the devouring child, mother analogy. Um, and she would try to help me like with school projects. Thankfully, I rejected most of it, and I did most of my own work, but she tried so hard to make sure that I kept up the grades that made her feel good about herself, because she doesn't get her own self-worth from herself. She got it from me. And so, yeah, you're right. I was objectified in a sense, I was her drug. And I find that like, and especially in a lot of women, they get, addicted to their children, or they get
Mm-hmm.
addicted codependently to men in their life, and
Mm-hmm.
I find that also with a lot of my clients that like men will be, in many cases, will have the drug and alcohol addiction. And then the women, they won't necessarily abuse and use drugs, but they'll use the drugs with their husband or their partner. Why? Because they so codependently want to save the partner, right? And then they think, until hopefully they do a lot of inner work and realize the error of their thoughts. They think that, oh my God, I was saving him and I was trying to do all this stuff for him, but he was such a narcissist. They may be right, he was such a narcissist, but also you were like, what they were doing was they were basically saying, by saving the narcissist, that they don't accept that presence, person. They don't accept all their so-called flaws or their shortcomings, and so they have this idolized version that they project, their own animus projection, that they want the man to be. And if the
Mm,
man can't be that through them saving, then they hate man, or they're disappointed, and so it creates this constant back and forth between men and women who don't have their animus energies integrated, between the narcissist and the codependent, which is
mm, mm,
basically, opposite ends of the same low self-worth spectrum. Yeah.
mm. I love that last point. Yes, the same on the low self-worth spectrum, just opposites. I'm hearing so much of polarity dynamics, societal roles around gender, masculinity, femininity, anima, animus, which is another layer that most people don't go on the, public, but it's really, really important. And I'm actually doing a course on this right now. It's called Heal Your Relationships Through Astrology and Polarity.
Yeah.
And it talks about these kinds of dynamics. You have these polarity teachings these days, and I have to speak about this because
That I want to
on the
also.
one on the one hand, I will say that there's benefit there,
Mhm.
because I think with all of the modern society, moving into age of Aquarius and, all the systems being shaken up, even our systems of family and sexuality and relationship are very much being shaken up as well, to where people don't even want to date anymore, this, that, and the other, right? Like the whole landscape is changing.
Mhm.
And inside of that, a lot of people are really confused and scared and like don't understand what the hell is going on. So they want to connect with something familiar, with something reliable, with something that will help to make sense of this very, unexplainable landscape. But it's not anything new. It's not fresh. It's just an old idea recycled with new terminology as if it's like
Yeah.
some new, brilliant. No, it's just more of old gender roles of society and actually very rigidly placed to where if you don't fit into this explicitly, then somehow you're a failure or you're not doing it right, etc. Now, where I come in with astrology, and I almost, as an astrologer, would take offense. It's not really offense because like I just know better. But when you understand the nature of polarity and how everything is connected, it's all one, right? So basically, that whole polarity coaching is still built in separation consciousness and the idea that the masculine and feminine are separate and have to stay that way, that you couldn't possibly find integration. No, no, you don't have an anima and an animus. Like, don't even consider that,
Yeah.
right? So in the zodiac, we can actually see that very clearly with the different signs and their polarities because they have an elemental nature to them. It helps us to understand how to navigate those energies. So with the two main groups that I want to talk about are the Aries Libra
Mhm.
sign group and then the Cancer Capricorn sign group. So with Aries and Libra, you have the masculine Aries fire, which is very typical, warrior, man, like, alpha, all this stuff, right? And then Libra is the Venus, like feminine, just like beautiful into like nice fashion and she looks amazing and she's like trying to get along with everybody, right? And so these are two polar opposites and they attract each
Yeah.
other. But humans don't rarely show up that unilaterally. We have a blend of all of these energies in our chart. So for instance, right, shifting gears a little bit to the sort of masculine, feminine, divine, or infernal
Mhm.
versions of those things. I myself have a lot of feminine energy in my astrology chart. I have strong placements with the moon and strong placements with Venus. And in some ways, that has actually made it difficult for me to be a man in this world. It's true because men are not encouraged to have emotions. Men are not encouraged to be sensitive or vulnerable, right? I had to learn for myself how to navigate those things, which has not been easy at all.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also have a strong masculine energy, right? So I'm not going to abandon that part of myself either. It's completely relevant, it's important, it's vital for me in many different ways, you know. They both exist and they coexist. When they coexist,
Yeah.
I have a better time of it. When they're at odds and at war with each other, I'm suffering a lot more.
Mhm.
So in the same way, you know, in our relationships, if we're expecting someone, our partner, our friend, or whatever, to just show up with this superficial image of, again, our own inner projections of what we need them to be, we're going to fail at all our relationships. That's not relationship. That is ego projection. You're not actually dealing with a person. You're
Yeah.
dealing with your own self.
Yeah. Yeah. I can relate to, like, I have an out. I'm very much an amateur on astrology, so you're gonna have to school me through this. But I
That's
have
okay.
like a Libra moon, which
Mhm.
which I know is like very good, like for holding space and negotiating,
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. And I basically like suppressed that part of myself,
Mhm.
and that's because, like, now I wouldn't say I'm fully in touch with it, but I'm much more in touch with it, in my healing. But back in the day, it wasn't. That requires a lot of connection with people, right? Like,
Mm.
if you're going to be a Libra moon, that means you're going to be very connected to people, holding space for them, and connected. And when I was a child, connection was dangerous because my
Well, it's
dad,
also the moon is the relationship to the mother. So
yeah,
because of your relationship with your mother, that impacted your ability to express that Libra energy. So that's why the
exactly.
personal stuff matters even more than just the chart. You're like your own lived experience is crucial.
Yep, exactly. And so, like, it was either connect with people, especially women, all my relationships, and get consumed. So
Mm.
avoid it because of that, or show emotions and connect with my dad, and my dad would spank me, or my dad used to yell at me and be like, "I'll give you a reason to cry." I'll give you what do they call it back? I don't know if parents still say it, like, "Don't give me those crocodile tears." They used
Mm.
to say. I don't know if you're old enough for that
No,
expression.
yeah, I heard those a couple times at least.
But yeah, so, like, whether it was showing emotion and vulnerability and then being consumed by it, or showing a vulnerability and being, physically violated by it, that part of me got suppressed. And I was very much a recluse and a black sheep, and, like, I didn't know how to connect with people. And some people will go, "Oh, well, you're no like," like, very, like, Asperger-ish kind of traits, and they
Mhm.
would call that neurodivergence, and maybe it falls into that category. I'm not an expert on the neurodivergence kind of world, but I just see it as a trauma response.
Mhm. Well,
I
actually, that's enough to be kind of under the neurodivergent umbrella when essentially your brain just kind of has to rewire itself that
Exactly.
are a bit
Yeah.
outside the standard deviation.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things can happen. So it's perhaps a bit more common than people realize, especially when we realize that trauma is part of that umbrella and how
Yeah.
ubiquitous trauma really is.
Mm. Yeah. And then I didn't actually, you know, the universe, God, always has a way to, like, help us to tap into stuff. And just a very quick anecdote. I had no plan to ever go into personal training, to go into, like, the health and fitness world. I was actually wanted to be like this stupid movie, Jerry Maguire. You remember that with
I do. Yeah.
Tom Cruise? Yeah, yeah. I was like, I want to be a douchey. I didn't say that. I want to be a douchey sports agent, you know. And so I literally went to school, studied sport management, and by chance occurrence, some guy came to me in the gym. He's like, "Wow, you have really good form. Where do you train your clients?" I'm like, "I'm not a trainer." He goes, "You need to be a trainer," you know.
Hmm.
And he took me under his wing. Brilliant guy, great trainer. And then next thing you know, I come up from college, and instead of, like, going to work in, like, the NFL, the NBA, and I'm training clients, you know. And so what that did, though, it forced me now to tap into my Libra moon that I had been
Hmm.
suppressing for so damn long, you know.
Hmm.
And it worked. But then what happened also? Now we can go off on a whole rant of my wounds, but then I had, of course, like, rejection wounds, and I have to perform. That's actually what came into, like, a lot of my addictions. Was now I am on the stage training people at a gym, and everyone's looking at me,
Hmm.
and what if I don't look good? And I can go, we can go into all the stuff with fear of inadequacy, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that goes into my father. We didn't really even, I didn't touch on that. you know.
I mean, it's such an infinitely rich topic. We could talk for forever on it. But I love let's segue into it. Finishing or me finishing my point earlier about like those two groups because I mentioned Aries Libra.
Yes,
The other
yes,
one
yes.
is Cancer Capricorn, right? So Aries Libra is kind of more like Romeo and Juliet, where Cancer Capricorn is more like the Romulan whatever the Capulets, their parents, right? Like that's the two lovers, and then these are the two foundational structures of the matriarch and the patriarch. And so
Mhm.
the mother father archetype, right? So if you're looking for mother wounds, look to your moon. If you're looking for father wounds, look to your Saturn. You could see it in the sun as well, or also the Venus or Mars placements too, right? Because these are the rulers of these signs respectively.
Yeah, yeah.
Aries is ruled by Mars, the moon is ruled ruler of Cancer, Venus rules Libra, and then Saturn rules Capricorn. So in that mother father wound, it's like so many people don't really have that integration. And with the devouring mother, it's like she doesn't have her own self and she lives through her children, right? She doesn't actually, like I've heard people say, oh, excuse me, someone I knew told me her mother
Yeah.
told her, admitted to her that she had her, my friend, as a child because her, the mother, was lonely.
Mm.
She's like, I had you because I was lonely. I can't imagine personally, no, you know what, no judgment, but at the same time, it's like the state of consciousness, right? Like,
Yeah.
are you having this children to fulfill your own needs or to fulfill the child's needs? And that's, the same. Now with the patriarch, it's kind of like a same vibe, but except being addicted to their children or the relationships, which the feminine is more prone to, right? The feminine is more prone to social connection and cohesion, whereas the masculine is more prone to, pioneer out into the world to make their mark and do their thing.
Yeah.
And in the case of, the family structure or unit, it's like, okay, being the provider at all costs, but they don't have 1 ounce of emotional
Mhm.
space to contribute,
Yeah.
and they turn into a tyrant or a dictator or whatever,
Yeah.
right? So these are the archetypes that most of us are dealing with in terms of our formative years. We're dealing with some combination of this mother or father wound, and then it's no wonder why we have a hard time in our intimate relationships because we're still carrying around these
Yeah.
ghosts of the
Yeah.
past.
Yeah. And then it's like a lot of it's normalized by culture, and like I
Hmm.
see with some of my male clients that they obviously I'm not going to like tell them what's wrong with them, so I'm trying to ask them questions to get them, to explore further. In some extreme cases, I have to be like, hey, can I give you an observation? Like how does this
I'm going to
land?
be direct here.
Because
Let's
they're
go
just not
Mars
getting
Aries
it
about
at
it.
all. Yeah, but like especially in like the 50s, 60s, era, where this started, but now it's in extreme cases, not even necessarily because the parent wants this, but basically like the workaholic father,
Hmm.
is not present, and not even because he's a quote unquote bad father, but like not only is it normalized, but now these days you have to literally in some family households work 10, 12 hours a day. The father comes home, and so he's providing, and he's to the extent that he can, he's showing up for his children, but he's showing up an hour a day, you know. And so what people don't realize is that with this dynamic, that like in a more normal, even pre-World War II or homesteading, let alone community like indigenous people, the father was still more present throughout the day, throughout
Hmm.
the day, they would take him out hunting or work the farm, or whatever. Or if they sold stuff at a store in town, the son went with the father. You know what I mean? Long story short, 12 hours gone. Now the mother has to be the disciplinarian. They have to be the father during the day, and
Hmm.
so they don't realize that, the mother then becomes hyper masculinized as a result of it. And then now the boys, the mother starts to be the disciplinarian and then controls the son, as opposed to the father being the natural disciplinarian. Now it's just, oh, mom's controlling me, she's devouring me, and then there's a lot of resentment that a lot of men years later don't even realize, because ultimately they're like, oh well, I didn't actually have a quote unquote bad childhood, and but there was a lot of masculine neglect of the children, whether the father meant to do it or not. A lot of just uh, emotional unavailability, and so then it creates men, that are basically looking for women to run their lives, you know,
Hmm.
and then so they constantly cycle in women who are controlling, and they have the hypermasculinization, and then of course society promotes that, like the pantsuit generation and the third wave feminism and all that stuff. And so yeah, so I see a lot in like a lot of the trauma and the trauma responses are so hard for people to detect because they're not overt. They're covert. It's not because things are happening, it's because things aren't happening, and the people
Mm.
aren't aware of what should be happening, like a father being there on and off during the day. you know so I see that a lot, and I think uh that brought a lot of my little, my anima struggles and imbalances and stuff, because my dad was emotionally available a lot. My dad was a workaholic. And so my mom had to, not only was she was devouring, maybe because of her own codependence, but now out of pure survival, she had to be the protector. And sometimes she literally had to protect me because my dad was crazy, hopped up on all kinds of drugs and dangerous.
Mm.
So much, so much to unpack. It's been a
Yeah,
long.
I mean, your vulnerability is epic levels. I appreciate you and your courage for all of that. And
Yeah, man.
I think it's also really important to talk about and touch upon some of the things that you were describing there in the situation, which is like society is also dramatically transforming, and again, the environment has an impact. So when the man has to work 12 hours a day just to provide for his family, of course he's going to be exhausted when he gets home. Of course he's not going to have any energy to share with the family, right? This doesn't make it inherently his doing
Yeah.
directly, right? So there's these subtle psychological, societal things that are also at play that we
Mhm.
have to navigate. Of course, and ironically, and okay, so there's so much to say about this. I would definitely call it the Pluto in Aquarius and age of Aquarius generation. I mean, we saw it in the hippies with the free love
Yeah.
generation and like everybody just having sex with each other, and now we're seeing it with like more sexuality stuff. I mean, then like the trans stuff, which is honestly, I think, like a very clear agenda on top of it, but it fits under the whole Aquarian thing, which, okay, Aquarian energy rules homosexuality. It rules everything that's not the norm. It rules,
Mhm.
every, like, so even people who want to have a relationship, but they don't want to get married, like that's going to be Aquarian, right? It's like
Yeah.
whatever's not the traditional thing is very Aquarian. So we're having to navigate all of that, and yeah, it's just almost impossible because we have to decide for ourselves,
Yeah.
what really works for us, and not let anyone try and dictate to us. And that's also a challenge in this day and age. But the
Yeah.
societal structures, that's such a crucial component. I think we don't talk about enough when we're having these conversations and pointing fingers and blame. It's like, well, there's an environmental factor here too that's really
Yeah.
crucial.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like we get one extreme, there are obviously people are play the victim blame game, or the other extreme is you manifest everything that's bad about you, and then and so now you like it's almost like victim shaming, in a
Mhm.
sense. And it's like, well, yeah, we were born into a freaking loosh fest, demonic hellhole kind of place. And mind you, hellhole's only perspective. If you're constantly in victim consciousness, you're going to call it a hellhole, of course.
Well said.
But nonetheless, when you're in it, right?
Mhm.
And so, the predator class running the planet, that we can have another conversation about how they got here and all that occult stuff, absolutely sends all these mixed messages. And then we perpetuate it without realizing. Of course, it's almost like sometimes like we think they control the world, like every step. It's like, I don't think they have to do that as much. It's like they put out little things, right? They warp things, pervert things, invert things, and then we just run with it. And we just run with it, And then so now again, the workaholic father, not just does he have to work because, everything's more expensive by design, but also, what it does, bringing back all the way from IFS, is it enables that workaholic part that loves to distract. So it's like almost like it's like perfect, for the father who really does want to escape and does want to avoid. Now it's
Mhm.
perfect. They have a perfect excuse. I'm working 12 hours a day.
Mhm.
And then when I
Mhm.
get home, don't go near me, I'm tired and I want to have my beer and watch my show and go to bed. And I mean, I understand that to some degree, but it's like we're perpetuating it. At that point, it's not even really like the fault of the predators anymore. It's like now we have to become aware of it. And something interesting too, talking about homosexuality and trans and just uh, gender roles, is someone recently told me, a single mother, that she was like, she laughed about it, but like her 3-year-old walked by. She's a single mother. I asked her that. Walked by with her heels on, right? No big deal, whatever. Like no judgment. Kids, like experiment and learn. But like a common theme in single mothers is because there's not a father there, the son doesn't know what to model. So
Mm.
he may not necessarily be into men or women, and we can get into like the origins of homosexuality and all that stuff. But at 3 years old, regardless, it's more that like the father's not there. So mom, who's wearing the pants, so to speak, who's doing the masculine stuff also, now the boy is just following what mom does, you know?
Mm.
And then it can get into all now the androgyny. And I remember growing up in the 80s, with all the hair metal bands and all
Hmm.
that androgyny, and all that stuff. And so it all kind of reinforces itself, and it's a shit show to navigate. So
Well,
much.
to say the least. There's even astrology transits that definitely relate to that, with those timings of things. I think it's super important, honestly, to talk about the divine feminine and even the suppression of the divine feminine, as it relates to this social landscape we find ourselves navigating in these days. Tell me what you think of when you hear that, and like how do you relate to those terms?
Well, I would say the divine feminine, probably a lot of stuff everyone already knows, but it's the quote unquote right side of our brain, the more
Mm.
mammalian side, the limbic system, but ultimately the emotional side. And so with that is creativity, imagination, holistic views of things. And a lot of that has been suppressed for so damn long. We live in a really, really left brain dominant society. And so, like without getting into too much like the feminine stuff, but like the patriarchy, you know, some will say we don't have a patriarchy at all. No, we do, but
What
there's
would they say we have if we don't?
what's that?
What would they say we have in place of the
Exactly. Yeah.
patriarchy?
Yeah. Exactly. And so, what I would say, like, as far as how I see the divine feminine, or lack thereof in the world, is now it's like it's been suppressed so that we could dominate the world, and spread all whatever, the wealth and exploitation of the world, because that's a masculine trait, right? So the
Hmm.
ones who rule the planet, they needed the patriarchy to do that. And now what they're doing is they are now offering us the feminine to save the planet, except it's the shadow feminine, you know?
Mm.
And so it's the fairness, the inclusivity, the
Well,
quote,
the fairness without justice. That's,
yeah, yeah,
there's
yeah.
like
And it's,
put a happy smile on it, but just to forget the fact that we're raping you around the corner.
yeah,
Excuse the, grape, whatever.
no, it's what we're doing, and so now it's like we go from like shadow capitalism, because capitalism itself is just really trade. It's just trade. But like the shadow version is what we're in right now, is centralized governments and exploitation and greed and all the shadows of unconsciously that are feeding that. And then now, in typical polar version, now the pendulum's swinging to the opposite. And now we have the shadow feminine, saving the world with what's to come, the universal basic income, the social credit system, and all this fairness and inclusivity, and safe spaces and everything, except when you disagree with the shadow feminine, then you're cast out of society, And so now I see, the what people think is uh, like a divine feminine saving the day is really now the shadow feminine, taking over. And so there's now this transition of everything. And AI, I think, is just what they're trying to do is trying to make that, like to seal the deal, because AI means there's no humans involved. So, everything's objective and fair, and well,
Mm.
yeah, of course, you're rolling your eyes
Yeah,
behind me.
I know because I know that you and I both know
Yeah,
that
of course.
you would have to actually have ethics involved first and foremost, and the people programming it would also have to be ethical. So two big gaps that are currently
Yeah,
not
yeah,
even in
yeah.
the conversation at all. So we're not even going to get down to
Yeah, we
that.
can go down AI for another hour rabbit hole. Yeah. But yeah, as far as like the divine feminine, like I would say on a global scale, yeah, that's where see it. And then it's like a lot of like the third wave, fourth wave. I don't know what we're on with feminism now, but it's like, oh, the answer to patriarchy is matriarchy. But it's
Hmm.
like if you look at the etymology of the word, archy means rulers, patri means
Hmm.
man. So it
Hmm.
ruled by men. So all you want to do now is to rule by women.
Hmm.
So that's where I see the divine, the inversion and the warping of the divine feminine, right now on the planet.
Mm. So spot on. Yeah, you really got a big chunk of it, I would say. And I think you actually kind of turned me on to something else in me just listening to you share that. And now this wasn't originally my idea, but I think maybe this conversation is helping to piece more of it together than I had previously done, which is like, okay, so there's this conversation that the whole trans thing, movement, etc.,
Yeah.
is actually an erasure of straight women, cis women, whatever,
Mhm.
right? And inside of this umbrella of this kind of agenda of the dark feminine trying to supplant the divine one, I think this is a perfect vehicle because it's like, okay, interestingly enough, and I myself, am very alternative. I mean, I probably would have called myself liberal growing up in New York as I did. Once I
Mhm.
left New York, I started to get a little bit
I'm
clearer
in the
picture of the
same place
world.
as you. Yeah.
Like I was like, oh, there's a whole world outside of New York with other people who have other views. Maybe I should pay attention to them too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But inside of that, there is definitely this, this agenda inside of it of entitlement wrapped up into it, which is totally shadow feminine, right? So I'll give you a personal example. I was in India recently, and they have a lot. And actually, I'm in Thailand now, so there's a lot of actually like sort of alternative sex, sexuality cultures. They have the lady boys here in East Asia, and then they also have some kind of like trans person in society. I forget like what they call them in India, but it's basically the same thing. They're dressed up in female garb, out to the nines and like full on committed to it. And you know what? Great, more power to them, no problems. Except this one piece. Okay. First of all, India is a very impoverished country. It has like some of the highest poverty in the world. So I've definitely in my travels noticed where there's poverty, there's social unrest and crime, etc., right? Like those two things go hand in hand. So it's not too much of a surprise to me that, you'd find a lot of beggars or even some beggars who might even be a little bit unsavory. But it was a surprise to me that one of these trans women in India,
So you
not
say
just one
trans
actually,
men, you mean
I'm not sure. Sorry, I don't
man
want to
that's
like,
dressing as a woman?
a man, a presumably man dressed as a woman.
Okay, okay. I just want
Um,
to make sure.
yeah, sorry, I know I'm not
Yeah.
good at using the terms either anyway,
Yeah.
but it actually didn't just happen once. It wasn't an isolated incident. It happened repeatedly where because they are actually, there is space for them in the society, which is ironic because India is very, very repressed and homophobic, but somehow this particular subsect of society is honored and even some might say revered, right? Kind of like the two spirits back in indigenous cultures. But
Yeah.
where it gets weird and twisted is that somehow, I guess, this creates a sense of entitlement where they will demand money from you.
Mm.
Demand. I got into a fight, kind of. It wasn't really, I'm just like, no. I had to repeat myself. I must have been 20 times. No, no, go away. No, go like
Yeah. Yeah.
trying to extort money from me because he's dressed up as a woman. I don't give a fuck. Like just because you've chosen something about your life does not make you entitled to anything about me. That's not how
Exactly.
this works, right? So this is where that shadow feminine, and thank you for being with me the long winding story, but
No,
it's
that's right.
like that shadow feminine of entitlement, which by the way, I want to, bring it out to equalize the playing field a little bit. That doesn't mean that only women can be expressing that shadow feminine entitlement. In fact, many narcissistic men are completely running from a dark feminine entitlement
Mhm.
with their behaviors.
Yeah.
So again, like it's not a gendered thing. It's like the energy, the masculine or feminine energy itself, which we all have inside of us. This is where we can actually start to get a handle on these things and make some headway or integration.
Yeah, that's all makes perfect sense. Even like I can relate, with the narcissism. I told you I was reckless and definitely entitled, and so I had some of those narcissistic tendencies when I got older, and it came out especially when I was an addict and I had like no conscience, or very
Mm,
very little of it, let's say. And so those came to the surface. But you know what? Say what you will. I have no regrets now because I learned from that at the time, of
mm.
course. But that kind of entitlement and recklessness, like you said, from the dark feminine, pissed a lot of people off and got me in trouble, and it forced me to hit rock bottom, and face myself. But one thing too was real fascinating. Speaking more like on a global kind of and cultural perspective, is that um, this what's the word I'm looking for? The roles, right? So like gay, trans, LGBTQ, XYZ. I don't know what's there anymore these days, but like they were in Indian society the untouchables, right? Just like in America, like no, like
I'm
not
not sure about that one,
not
but
no, not to that degree, like beggars on the street and people like like hated them, but like they were some of the more cast out, stigmatized type of people in America. And so now, you know, now they're like looked and praised as like you said, like they're this venerated sect of society in India. So much so where they can demand money and people actually give them money and
I mean, I guess so. I don't know. I'm guessing that I was more refusing than the average Indian.
mm,
So, like one thing that I could say about Indian culture is they're very like into social harmony and even like social compliance.
yeah.
So there's like no one really wants to make waves. Everyone wants to be really polite. I would say even to the cost of their authenticity in a lot of cases. So they might not have ever had to deal with someone being so like straight up no in their face about
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. No,
Maybe.
that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, on the extreme other end of the spectrum, us Americans, roll and title and screw you and I'm right. But I could see that like both dynamics are actually leading, both ends of the spectrum are leading to the same result is like the, what's it called? The entitlement of
Mhm.
like trans. Well, over here now, trans, like not all. So this is not a judgment of all trans people, but the extreme examples are now they feel entitled to be in women's sports and they just don't see a problem with that. And like you said, the erasure of women. Now, granted, you can argue that like women becoming too wrapped up in sports is a hyper masculine thing, but nonetheless, it's still theirs, and now it's being erased. You know, so it's interesting to see the Indian side of it, I suppose.
I think, and it's the same no matter where you go. Everywhere in the world, it's different, even in the United States, from one state to another. The land is different, the people are different, but we are all the same humans. We are all the same, creatures dealing with mostly the same issues, even if the cultural specifics are unique. And one thing that's definitely a global phenomenon is human ego. There is no corner of the world I have gone so far where I don't see this being the main issue. And, in this case, I think it's this idea that this status or whatever it is so venerated that it's beyond any question or fault. And it's a hugely slippery slope. I mean, it's akin in my idea to the whole identity worship of politicians and just like let's pedestalize everything outside of ourselves and worship. Meanwhile, I'm gonna just let myself and character waste away because I'm just consuming everything and contributing nothing. It's just like the system wants to feed ego basically,
Totally,
and
totally.
with the transits, with astrology, with our own charts, we can actually start to see those things, distinguish them, and liberate ourselves from them. But we have to be willing to step out and see the big picture. We can't just you know be the fish in water and not even realize we're swimming in water. It's not,
Yeah,
we're going to stay
yeah,
in
yeah.
water for the rest of be an amphibian, expand your gills, come up to the land. There's a whole other world out here.
Yeah, well, an amphibian, right? They're trans, right? Didn't they start in the water and then grow legs and go onto the land?
Trans water to
Yeah,
land and air to, I don't know, whatever, but that's really funny. Yeah, no, it's true. And we could be trans, we could be transhuman. Certainly lots of people want that. I would rather be transformed in my soul spirit consciousness. That's all I need. Um,
the transmute.
yeah,
You know,
exactly.
yeah,
Transmute, transmorph,
transcend.
and
Yeah.
integrate. So I want to say, as far as the divine feminine is concerned, I strongly believe, feel, know, my experience has proven this to me, and I can give a short account of something specific, an example. But the importance of the divine feminine as a man. Okay, so I'll share a little bit of personal stuff. I don't like to talk about too much family stuff publicly, but I'll say that my mother was a very loving mother, and there were also, lots of problems she had from her own childhood, what have you. But she absolutely gave me at least, pieces of the experience of like a divine kind of love, like this
Yeah.
pure, love of the mother, if even just for whatever it was, to where I was actually able to take that love and expand upon it and experience it on a higher level. Where it's like, oh, this is beyond just my personal mother. There's a great mother. There's a planetary mother right underneath my feet. We could even go into galactic level stuff if you want to. But there is this very present divine feminine being literally under our feet. And for me, that was actually one of the formative experiences I had where I became consciously connected to this divine being, and it was like the closest I've ever been to God. And I had had plenty of other sort of like spiritual, mystical experiences in the past, but this is literally the closest. And energetically, the impact it had on me, to where it's like, wow, she literally provides us with everything,
Hmm.
and without even one second thought. Like talk about a pure unconditional love. It's just like all of it is given freely. And yet most of us on this planet will never even acknowledge that, never recognize it, or even connect. Beyond that, we'll actually so deeply disconnect ourselves from it that we will become, narcissistic agent smiths of
Yeah.
destroying our own humanity and those around us just because we're so emotionally void. And so, in terms of like actually coming out of that narcissism, or like what I would say the divine feminine, also known as self love, right, is the access to break free of that. And for men in particular, but also women too, especially with how masculinized they have been socially engineered into lately, right? Is like to actually feel, to actually go within and connect with the physical body, to rest, to
Yeah.
eat good food. I mean, most people don't even think about their food and water. Talk about disconnection to the divine feminine,
Hmm.
right? Food and water are absolutely divine feminine providences. And most people are so disconnected from that. They're not drinking water at all. If they are, it's poisoned here, there, or whatever. And the same with the food. And then everybody's wondering why they're not feeling well, why they can't think straight, and all their relationships are, deteriorating. Because the one of the most important ones, that inner feminine, has been brainwashed out of most of society, to the point where even women now are discouraged from being this divine feminine. Oh no, you have to be a powerful warrior feminine, otherwise it's not okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we see that it's I don't even know what the story is. But I know of it, and there's not like that model. There's like some American Eagle model. I don't even know what the story is, and it's big in the left leaning media, and I don't even know what the story is. But now there's memes about like a feminine woman, and how like if you're into a feminine woman, the left is saying that like you're somehow like a misogynist. It's so weird, man. It's so inverted. I even have trouble explaining it because it's
It's backwards. It doesn't make
so
sense.
backwards. Yeah, and so and it's sad because they've gotten women, to reject their own femininity as well. It's like it goes without saying that men have been taught to disconnect from their own emotions and femininity for however many millennia, but
A
now
long time. Too
women are
long.
getting disconnected from it, and
Yes.
that's troubling. That's
It's a big deal because they're the keepers of that. They're better at it than we are naturally, which is part
yeah,
of why, men tend to be, underwhelming for most women in those realms. Also, society has not, supported us. I mean, even plenty of women will say that they want an emotional man, but then, when he does express emotion, there's all these other problems.
yeah,
Some women kind of have this like monopoly on emotion in their relationships, or they're like the only one who's allowed to have emotions.
yep,
I've
yep.
experienced that. I know men also have other men have experienced that. So it's very windy, um, but yeah, in the end, it's like the real rebellion is making space for that and giving permission for it to exist, and even, I would say honoring it and valuing it, because without that, everything is going to continue to fall apart. It has been, I would say, this is the thing, this is the thing about this like pendulum swing and this lashback, because women are so upset with men because they were disconnected from their feminine,
Yeah.
and that's where the patriarchy got super on steroids and super abusive and super disassociative, like no human empathy anymore, right? It's just basically all a system of narcissism. And so now, it's like, okay, well, that's actually spreading to women, and they're the natural teachers and keepers of that skill set. If they lose it, what the hell are we going to do as a society?
Yeah.
There's going to be no empathy at all. And then boom, it's one step to transhumanism because we gotta get rid of these emotions. They're too bothersome.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
can't bother.
Yeah.
We have work to do. We have slavery to get on with.
Yeah. No, and they've been predictively programming it, for ages, and like, oh, what's the name of the movie? Really good movie with shit.
What's it about?
Well, Christian Bale. Yeah, Christian Bale. The one of the I think he was Batman, and
Yeah,
uh,
I know who he is.
yeah, he's from Empire of the Sun. I remember I was a little kid seeing that. I don't know if you remember that movie. Remember that movie?
It rings a bell, but I don't know if I saw it.
British kid in China. Anyways, I can't remember the name of the movie, but in this new society, kind of like Brave New World, everyone is on antidepressants,
Mm,
and emotions are the enemy. And
mm,
like, yeah, it's scary. And like his own son snitches on him because the father stops taking his antidepressants. Why? Because he wants to be in touch with his anima. He starts to see the value in it. And there was even another movie. It's like a Netflix series, a very similar. And in this case, two people meet each other, and then they go off like their medications so they can start to feel more. And then one thing leads to another. Other people start seeing that they're feeling. God forbid. So anyway, so the point is, yeah, like whether we see it in our own lives or it's being projected to us through the movies, yeah, the inner feminine is so crucial, so incredibly crucial. And with men especially, it's like, like going to the polarity thing. But it's like men need to get in touch with their emotions, obviously. We, although women are increasingly disconnected from them, we've been disconnected from it forever. And then once we do that, then we could start to take the leadership roles that we're expected to do. But until then, us men have a lot of work to do with our emotions. And so I find that, like, in the healing space, it's like, it's funny, is like, as an activist and a truther and a conspiracy theorist for like 10 years, most of my friends and following on social media were men. Now, as I've transitioned and I actually got deplatformed, if you remember, I had to
hmm
restart my whole social media. Now, by the time I restarted it, I was much more into healing my own trauma, getting in touch with my anima, my feminine side. So with my posts being more geared toward healing, now it's like flipped. Now I would say 2/3 of my following are women,
hmm
and so it's like the women are kind of leading the way right now, with the healing. And I just ask women to be patient with us.
Women are generally kind of the more natural healers,
Yeah, of
just
course.
generally. I mean, there are men, I've met them myself, gifted. So it's not to preclude men.
Yeah.
It's just, I'll give you a quick example. In my yoga teacher training in 2010 in New York City, I was the token male. They called me this. the
Yeah.
token male. I was the only man in the whole yoga class school. It's like 30 people for that summer of our teacher training. And you see it constantly. It's a massively dominated field by women. The whole, I mean, and I've been in these healing spaces for just as long, actually longer,
Yeah.
since my 20s, so for 20 years. And it's almost always women, and you get a smattering of men, maybe one other man or two, here or there. But this is part of, you know, it doesn't have to be a battle of the sexes. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm jealous of this or that. It's like, we can find the synergy and the complementary union in that. And so, okay, women are generally, yeah, more connected to their emotions and healing and the spiritual realms. And maybe some men have felt threatened by that. Personally, it doesn't bother me. I'm just like, teach me. I want to absorb all the lessons. I don't even care, what your gender
Yeah.
is. But where women do seem to have like a little bit of advanced status with that is that natural connection to the inner feminine. And so, what am I talking about? Okay, just simply emotions, right? People are so disconnected from emotions, but also don't recognize in many cases that these are spiritual tools, that our emotions are actually guidance on a spiritual level to help us to navigate life. And if we're not using those emotions, if we're ignoring them, if we're suppressing our intuitions and overriding our gut feeling because our ego is telling us, oh, but I want this job, but your stomach is like, it's gonna kill you, and then you push yourself into it anyway, and then 5 years later you're about to die and you wonder why. Well, no, actually, maybe you should have listened to that internal mechanism because it's there for a reason, and it's not only there for a reason, it's there for one of the most important reasons. And if we are overlooking that primal baseline, the whole spiritual path and approach is going to be flat, if not impossible.
Become
Because
spiritually
how?
narcissistic, you know?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and bypassy, absolutely, and there's no shortage of that these days,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
or maybe ever. I mean, I'm not trying to be a high horse. I have my own spiritual bypassing that I am
Yeah.
working to let go of more and more every day, but it's definitely not my default. Like there might be ways that can show up for me, but it's no, I'm painfully interested in authenticity, even like people giving me feedback.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah. Yeah. That's been my biggest aspect of healing has been my mother wound, and it's been my connection to the feminine. Um, and it's like so there too, dude. I freaking cry at every movie now. Like even like the stupid quote unquote. I'm saying this is my man side. The stupidest things.
That is the man's side. Listen, I cry more often than I would like to admit publicly, so I won't say the details, but
Yeah,
it makes me appreciate what you have to share about it very much.
yeah. Yeah, I saw. And it's so weird too. I have these parts that are so like what? Like literally, as I'm crying, there's parts like questioning, "Why are you doing this, Andrew?" I'm like, just go away. Like, just let me like be my feminine, emotional self. What the
Can
hell?
I feel? Can I feel? With that one little
Yeah,
interruption from
it's
your little
crazy.
chatty Cathy.
Yeah,
Well, that's
that.
the ego, It doesn't want to change. It doesn't want to soften. It wants to keep the structures the way it
But
is.
yeah, that's been definitely my biggest transition is just letting myself emote, and like trying to like lead by example with Ben. That's why it's like I have an advantage in the sense that like I don't have a lot of family in this country, or like, and if I do around the world, I don't know them. Both my parents are passed away. I only have one brother. You know, there's some stuff maybe him and I have some trauma, but like a lot of it, like the whole point is I can be brutally vulnerable and honest online, you know, without offending all kinds of family members. And hey, maybe that's why I'm here, right? Like I'm a guinea pig. So some days I look at it as like a lonely thing, but then I realize I have my soul family, people like you, people who support me. That's another thing. The vulnerability, is it's just knowing that I have friends like you and others out there. But yeah, like just men are just have to be more vulnerable, and like I said again, be patient with us women. I understand completely why you don't trust us and why you have your reservations. Like it's funny you were saying earlier. It's like I want a man to be emotional, and then the man emotes. No, not like that. You know, It's like they and I get that, they have their own father wounds, and yeah, man, it's so much to navigate. But like you said, a lot of it just comes down to our emotions. That's the way we navigate. And what I will say also is, it's speaking of the feminine, is the biggest problem I have with all my clients is getting them to embrace the yin, the non-doing, the feminine, because in that non-doing, in that stillness, is where the emotions come up, and the emotions to not just process, but then to lead them and then direct them to their soul, path, and to what to do next in their life, as opposed to listening to the ego. And it's really, really, I'll say frustrating, um, but just difficult to get people to just sit for a minute. Like I tell them, like you were talking about yoga, and how we can abuse anything. Even meditation could be abused, because meditation, I used to abuse it for dissociation. I'm
Hmm.
really good at meditating. I can dissociate into a meditative state quickly, right? So I started just teaching myself to just like sit, literally just sit, not even necessarily breathe in a methodical way or count, just freaking sit there. Just see what happens, see what comes up, see what you feel, see what your body's telling you. It's so foreign to people. It's unbelievable. I have people that can't, in between 2 weeks of seeing them last, they can't sit for 3 minutes. They just can't do it. I'm not even like judging them, because I was there too. But it's really the, speaking of the feminine, the non-doing. Just sit for 5 minutes, people. You can do it. You can do it. I know it's hard.
It's such a powerful conversation, and I think, men or women, anybody, I think there's some cultural differences you might find there. I mean, but for sure, Western cultures, very work-oriented
Oh yeah,
cultures, masculine, patriarchal, providing focused cultures. Yeah, men, women, everybody just doesn't even conceptualize rest, let alone actually do it.
yeah,
And so, sleep, rest, they've done studies. They show that the 4-day work week is actually much more productive,
yeah.
right? Like they actually get more work done in less time. This is an example of the power of yin, or the feminine, that's overlooked for this hyper fixated on doing masculine.
Yeah.
And, if you're talking about polarity, which astrology is based on, we're talking about positive versus negative, the yang, which is the fire, which is the positive, or the yin, which is the negative, or the passive, the receptive. And so they actually have yin yoga. A lot of people don't know about yin yoga. The most popular styles of yoga are the yang. They're
Yeah.
very fiery, get it done, which is fine. That's great. I love a good yang yoga class.
Mhm.
But the yin yoga class, yeah, people should probably get more into it, because it actually kind of shows you the deep benefit that can come from non-doing, from just being,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
beingness, and that's the feminine, that divine feminine is in our being. The divine masculine, it might be related to doing. I would say it's probably more like intuition, insight, and like intelligence,
Yeah.
moving into action. But it's like you need that receptacle to even receive that anyway. So if you're not plugged into that receptivity, everything goes haywire. Most people are just stuck on one end of the polarity, the fire constantly burning, and wondering why they're burning out. Well, we need that regenerative yin force,
Yeah.
that divine feminine. So even if you just take a good vacation, or give yourself some good food, or drink some good water, or deplug from social media for a few
Yeah.
hours a week or something,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it's more important now than ever, and it's only going to continue to get more important as this technological age increases with Pluto and Aquarius over 20 years from now. So,
But yeah, I would warn with the yin yoga, be careful, it's demonic, you know?
oh wow, yeah, and breathing too. Did you know that
Oh
breathing
my
is
God,
demonic?
yeah. Oh, that meme was going around. It's still, I'm sure, going around. Oh,
Oh, well, it's funny too, because actually breathing is very yin,
yeah.
right? Especially if you're inhaling, that's the receptive. Good luck getting far in life if you're not doing that. I mean, people don't think about it, because we're not taught to value the feminine. The feminine is so devalued, and one thing I can see for sure is like domestic labor, these, like you said, men just wanting women to come in and handle their lives. It's like the way I could see this whole gender war boiled down really simply, despite the fact that it's obviously codependency in disguise, right?
Yeah.
Whatever gender side you're on, but it basically comes down to what the tension and struggle is about. That neither gender wants to be the other one's slave. Can we just admit that? No
Yeah.
one wants to be in an inequitable relationship where they're having to carry the other adult as if theyey're a baby. So maybe we just all be adults and approach our relationships from there and we'll have a
There
good
you go.
time. I don't know. Maybe that's crazy of you
Problem,
to say
problem solved. Right. Just
that. Easier said than done, I
oh, of
know. But,
course. Oh, I know. Yeah.
we don't have to convolute it with psychological, labyrinths that take us nowhere.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
socially engineered ones.
Yeah. Our
Okay.
spiritual sovereignty, definitely having a balanced, feminine and masculine. That's where it comes together. Definitely.
We're doing it. And listen, thank you so much for being that kind of man because, okay, I'll share a little bit about this. I think it's like we wrap up.
Yeah.
Um, I've had a hard time expressing my emotions. Certainly, it's one thing to do it in a post on Facebook. Even that, you get trolls and comments of people who are just nasty. That's fine. I mean, it's not fine. I don't like it. I never will. But I can handle it enough that it's not going to stop me from being myself or doing my work. Um, but that being said, I've found it very difficult to actually express my emotions with anyone, but yes, more so with men. Like men are worse,
Yeah.
that they don't typically know how to hold space. They'll come in immediately with trying to fix or solve, or even like chastise you for having the feelings in the first place, which I think you alluded to a little bit
Yeah.
before,
Yeah.
like internally within your own process. So I really appreciate you being the kind of man who can hold that much emotional space because it is very rare. And I feel so black sheep about it because I feel like, well, why do I have to be the only guy? It's like, where are the other men who have this, little bit of skill set? I'm not saying I'm perfect, but at
Yeah.
least I'm having the conversation, right? In the same way that I know you are. So thank you. Thank you. I honor you and
Yeah,
I
man.
acknowledge you for that. I mean, that's part of why we wanted to make this podcast
Yeah.
happen. So I just
I
appreciate you for that.
appreciate you being here. And yeah, there's a great conversation, gender roles, dynamics, so many rabbit holes we could go on. Maybe we'll go on a rabbit hole, another time. But super grateful that after 2.5 years, we finally did this.
Capricorn
That's like,
accomplishment.
dude, like you want to talk feminine and masculine. That's like the hyper non-doing, right? 2.5 years of
Yeah.
non-doing.
We really trusted the flow on that one. We
Yeah,
really just
seriously.
what it no, which is a beautiful
Actually, yeah, it's
expression.
kind of symbolic if you think about it, right? You
Hmm.
know, we
Yeah.
didn't have to
And,
push, 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 push. We just
and we
said,
were still committed and we still made it happen. It was a lot of, I mean, we also have alternative
I've,
lifestyles where scheduling is perhaps
yeah,
more
plus
challenging than for the average
you're like
person.
14 hours in another time zone the last year. So
Also, yeah, I've been traveling through Asia the past 2 years,
yeah,
so it hasn't made anything easier, but even still, we made it happen. So, um, Andrew, why don't you let us all know, where anybody who's watching can find you, contact you, see more of your work, get in touch and
yeah.
take you up on your amazing work.
On social media, just look up Andrew Aponick, Aponick. I'm, as far as I know, the only Andrew Aponick in America. So any social medias, look that up. You can find me. My website is holistic-coaching.org, but it's spelled WHOLE, holistic dash dash coaching.org. Um, and yeah, other than that, you'll find me occasionally on Adam's wall, and maybe you'll find us again doing this soon. So look forward to possibly doing that.
I would love the opportunity, Andrew, maybe even sooner than 2.5 years, so we can see
Probably,
see
yeah.
about that. But yeah, it was so great to have you. Thank you everybody for watching. I'm also offering, just to let everybody know, this Heal Your Relationships Through Astrology and Polarity course. And maybe heal is not the full terminology of what would accurately describe. I could say also strengthen. If you need to heal your relationships, you can use it for that. If you want to strengthen your relationships, it's
Yeah.
also going to work for that because it's going to get you grounded into your own astrology, your own soul makeup, and then your partners. So, or your children, your parent, whatever it is, any relationship that matters. And we can start to even, romantically or just with masculine or feminine, whatever your romantic interest or not, find more social harmony by being able to navigate. I'll say, I looked up your chart, Andrew. I look up almost everybody's chart I get any degree close to in my life so that I can better understand them as a person. I understand, oh, so Andrew has a Libra moon, so he's going to be very diplomatic, he's going to be emotionally conscientious about his relationships. Like, I can better relate to you now because of that, and we can all do that. We can all do that in all of our relationships, and it's such a game changer. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you again, Andrew, for your amazing work and presence. And yeah, I look forward to more soon.
Yeah, man. The feelings are mutual, and good to finally have this chat.
Yeah, yeah, I feel like we're getting ready for some more in the future as well. It seems like we have a
100%
lot
down
to
for that. So
say. So I'm
let's,
delighted we could kick it off.
yeah, man. So yeah, until next time, we will divinely time whenever it happens. You know?
Awesome.
Maybe
All
we'll
right,
put a
bless.
little more. Maybe we'll put a little more masculine into it this time. And make it happen a little sooner.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I'll be settled soon. I won't be traveling as
Yeah,
much
yeah, yeah.
here in a couple of weeks. So that'll also help. But yeah, bro, I so appreciate you. Thanks again, and we'll talk more soon.
All right, man. Appreciate you, bro.
Stay blessed.
Yeah, you too, bro. Let me unrecord this.
Okay. Awesome. That was great.